Hello everyone, and welcome to the tutorial for how to change the struts on your 2014 to 2019 Cadillac CTS yourself at home with commonly available hand tools. This is your strut right here. It sits behind your brake rotor and wheel assembly and is a critical, if not the most critical, component of your front suspension. It not only has a built-in shock absorber and spring to make the ride more comfortable, it also provides a huge amount of the structure that keeps your wheel assembly connected to your car. Now, when these go bad, and mine are really bad, you will have symptoms such as excessive nosediving when braking, the sound of clicking or light popping noises when driving, especially at slower speeds, excessive body roll when cornering, a general feeling of unstableness while driving on the road, including increased vibrations and bottoming out and big thuds when hitting bumps, and in my case too, because these are very, very bad, excessive, if not huge amounts of vibration when braking. Now, changing these is no easy task. Actually, one way is actually decently easy. The other way, which is also the way that I'm going to be doing, is super not easy. The first way is you buy a complete strut assembly like this. And if you do that, you'll spend a little more money, but this job will be a lot easier for you. All you have to do is take the old one out and put the old one back in. The second way, which is a lot more difficult, is you buy a strut that does not come in an assembly, meaning you get this structural piece and the built-in shock, but it doesn't come with this coil spring, the boot, or any of the hardware attached to it. It will be up to you to transfer your old hardware from the top of your strut to your new one. Now, this is totally possible as these coil springs last literally forever and all of this hardware can easily be changed over to your new strut, but it is a very labor-intensive and tough process. If you are watching this video, please do not consider doing it this way. It is the hardest, most worst way to do it. Myself personally, I don't really have a choice because one, I could not find complete strut assemblies for my car, and two, I didn't want to spend the extra $500 to $600. Now I am paying for that with time and labor, and if you choose to do it this way, you will too. I'm going to link in the description anywhere that I can find complete strut assemblies for either the magnetic ride version of the strut or the regular version of the strut, which is the one that I have. My car is not equipped with magnetic ride suspension. However, the struts themselves are very similar. The only difference is at the bottom of the strut down here, you will see a wiring harness come off and go into your car, and that is how the computer sends electrical impulses to the magnetic ride shock in order to change its characteristics. The difference is with that type of strut, you just unplug the connector before you do all of this stuff. So I will be linking to anywhere I can find complete strut assemblies for both the standard and magnetic ride suspensions, as well as links to just the struts without the complete assembly that will be up to you to change, which again, I do not recommend, but this video will cover it. And with that being said, let's get started. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to get your car jacked up and you want to pull the tire off. Easy peasy. I'm not going to cover how to do that because if you do not know how to jack your car up, you really shouldn't be attempting this anyway. Once your car is jacked up and the wheel is off, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you want to take a jack and you're going to want to slide it under the bottom of your wheel assembly to the lower control arm, and you want to put the jack so that it lifts the suspension right here. Now, the reason why you want to do that is you want to lift this whole assembly so you can have an easy time at taking this guy off. This is the front stabilizer shaft linkage, and it is attached to the strut right here. The bolt is in the front right here, and it attaches your sway bar to your front stabilizer shaft, which is right here, and runs through the car to the other side to connect to the driver's side suspension. So let's do that. So we can see here that I have my jack positioned to be lifting the bottom of the lower control arm up. You just want to crank it up ever so slightly so that it depresses the strut and supports the bottom of your wheel assembly so you can have an easier time at getting this guy off right here. Now the bolt to do that is right over here on the other side. An 18mm socket is what breaks it loose and takes it off. Now brace yourself because this is on there really hard and you might need a breaker bar. All right, so I just broke it loose and I am now turning my socket wrench to take the bolt out. However, you will notice a problem. This stabilizer shaft assembly linkage, the bolt that connects to it spins. This middle shaft spins and it will spin forever. You will notice in the middle there is a receiver for a hex screwdriver. And that is what you will need to use to get this bolt off the rest of the way. So let me show you what that looks like. It looks like this. You're gonna wanna get a crescent wrench, or if you have an 18mm wrench, just a normal one, you're gonna wanna get it in here like this so it holds the nut in place. Then, using this, which is a hex to socket adapter, you're gonna wanna put it inside the middle like that, make sure it fits and is snug, and then put your socket wrench on the back and twist it out. Now there's no way I can film this process because I need two hands, but basically you're going to be holding this crescent wrench with one hand and the socket wrench with the other, and you're slowly going to walk that nut right off the bolt. Now pay careful attention because as you do it, if this sway bar shaft linkage starts to bend, and it's not really going to bend, it's going to go in at an angle. If the angle is up, then you're going to want to lower your jack to make it flat and straight. If the angle is pointing down, then you're going to want to raise your jack so the angle turns straight, and it makes it easier for you to just push the bolt through and out, and then you are free of your stabilizer shaft linkage. So I'm going to go do that now and come back to you when it is out. All right, so as you can see, I've gotten the nut off. This stabilizer shaft linkage is now loose, and I can now just easily pull it out of the back of the strut. Now, very important, again, that was easy for me because I was adjusting my jack. I actually had to lift the wheel assembly up by a lot to make this thing level and easy so it could then easily come out. Now, with this done, we have to remove two other things. The first is this clip. This is the wire that goes to the wheel speed sensor over here. And next is this 10mm bolt that holds on the brake lines. So this, you could just fiddle open with a screwdriver and pull this out. This, you will need a 10mm socket for. So I'm gonna go do that now and come back. All right, now with both of these things out and loose, we could just push them out of the way. It is now time to lower your jack to let the front suspension hang down. This is a very critical step because that decompresses this coil and allows you to remove it. So I am going to go and do that now on my jack. And now it's being lowered. And without that front stabilizer bar linkage, it actually drops to be pretty low. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is these two bolts here attach this strut to this wheel assembly. You are going to need a breaker bar. These are a pain to take off, and you are going to want to loosen these nuts all the way to the tip of the bolt. You don't want to take them off because at the end of the bolts is a special compression gripper, and you are going to need to use a hammer to hit this nut to get the bolts to go out the back of the wheel assembly. So I'm going to get my breaker bar and I will do that. These require a 24mm socket. These are 22. If this starts to spin when you try and loosen this, you will need a 22mm wrench to resist it. However, because of the special compression gripper, it likely will not. So I am going to loosen it and I will hammer these out now. So as you can see, I have both of these nuts out to the end, and now I'm going to use this hammer to bash them out. So let's see. There we go, that's one. And that's two. We'll loosen them again. And we'll bash them a little more. Good, that one's out. And that one's out. We'll go a little more. Sure we can pull them out by hand. And if we can, which we can, then we're there. Now, very important, before you take these bolts out, get a bungee cord, get something to attach this wheel assembly to the sway bar. Only because when you remove these bolts, this whole thing is going to want to flop down. And I'm not saying it's going to pull the drive shaft right out of the differential, but like, it's going to try. So best to avoid that by getting something to hold it, to hold this wheel assembly onto the stabilizer shaft. So I'm going to go do that now. Okay, so this is what I did. A nice zip tie chain. I realize it looks kind of ridiculous, but it does the job, so who cares? And it's easily adjustable if I want it to be. This doesn't need to be the strongest thing in the world. All it needs to do is resist the wheel assembly's desire to flop down when you take these bolts off of its main support structure. So now, with everything secured, we can undo the nuts, pull the bolt, make sure you put it somewhere where you're not going to lose it, and then pull the other bolt. If it resists you, just push the wheel assembly into the car, but it really shouldn't. And just pull the other one out, there it is. And now there goes the wheel. I don't know if I caught that on camera, but I just tried to flop. That's all right. We caught it with our zip tie thing. And now the strut is dangling loose. The only thing left to take off are these 3 bolts at the top of the strut tower. These are 13 millimeter bolts, and they come out easily with a regular socket wrench. Just be very gentle when you do it. These bolts also have a very weird compression gripper at the end of them, and they can fall out. If they do, when you pull the strut out, they're going to fall on the floor. Just be mindful of it and be careful, but don't get worried if these get loose and wobbly. It doesn't mean they're broken. It just means that the compression gripper has fallen out of the hole for it on the strut mount itself. So let's go and do that now. Okay, so when you take the last of these 3 nuts off, the strut will collapse inside of the strut tower because it is now completely disconnected from the vehicle. Also, you have to take off this guy. It's just a cap to cover the main strut assembly bolt. Just take that off so you can see everything properly. Now, if we look under the car, the strut is now free. You can now pull it out of the vehicle, which I will do now. Just be careful not to tangle it in anything like a brake line or the wire going to your wheel speed sensor. And here is the strut out of the vehicle. Now, if you've already purchased a complete strut assembly, do this process in reverse and put it back in the vehicle, and you are done. It's actually not that bad if you have the complete assembly. These main bolts down here need to be torqued down to 111 foot-pounds. Then with a breaker bar turned 90 to 110 degrees after that. The stabilizer shaft assembly linkage, which is here, gets 49 foot-pounds of torque. These bolts at the top that connect the strut to the top of the tower that we use to drop it, these are 13 foot-pounds apiece. You want to finish tightening these, though, after the car is already back on the ground and everything is put back together. Easy peasy. However, as you can see here, I am not going that route. Here I have just the strut, but it is missing all of this other stuff. What is that other stuff? This is the top of the strut. This is the mount that actually connects it to the car. Underneath that is the top cap to the strut, as well as this is like a rubbery cushion for the spring. Next, we have the boot that protects this shaft in the middle from like rocks and stuff hitting it on the road. Underneath that, which you can't see, is like a rubber bump stop that cushions the shock if it depresses completely. And in between this top mount and this top cap is a large washer that allows the strut some flexibility. Now, transferring all of this from here to here is going to be hard. I really do not recommend you do this, but you can if you want to. But this is the disclaimer. I do not recommend you do this. It is going to suck because of this, the coil spring. This whole assembly here is held onto the strut by this one nut at the top. It connects to this top of the strut linkage here. When you take this bolt off, this spring is going to decompress. Actually, you can't just take it off like this, or it will explosively decompress and it will launch itself into the stratosphere. Do not take that top nut off if this spring is not compressed. And once you take this off, the spring is still going to expand, and it is going to be up to you to fight it, to recompress it, to put it back onto your new strut so all this other stuff can bolt down to the top of it. Now, GM recommends you use a strut press. The serial number begins with a J, and then it's some series of letters and numbers. Point is, it's like $1,000, and once you do this, you're going to be fine for the rest of the life of the vehicle. And also, if you have to buy a $1,000 thing to save a couple $100 on not buying the assembly, it negates the purpose. So you have two choices here. One, you could take both of these two things to a shop and say, "Hello, shop. Can you please switch all of this hardware for me if you have a strut press?" However, where I am, only dealers have those, and they're basically like, "Oh, bring the car in and we'll do the whole job for you." They are unwilling to help me because they want my money. And especially at a Cadillac dealership, it's like $300 just to get them to look at the car. Then all of the work adds on top of that. So we are going to have to compress this spring ourselves to transfer all the hardware ourselves to the new strut. Now, how we do that is with these. These are called Mcpherson coil spring compressors. You can rent them, like I did, from AutoZone. I can wholeheartedly say AutoZone's loan-a-tool program is great. You put down a deposit. You can have the tool for as long as you want. Then when you are done with it and you are satisfied with the job, you can return it and they refund you your full deposit. It is great. This is the part number for these Mcpherson strut spring compressors. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to loosen these and we are going to clamp the jaws around these bottom three springs. You're going to put one here, you're going to put one here, and then you're going to put the second one on the other side exactly in the same spot. Now, you can use an 18mm socket wrench to hand tighten these, but that is awful. It really sucks and it's a pain. So I am going to use my handy dandy power drill. You can also use an impact wrench. That's actually probably the better tool. But in my case, I have my power drill here. It is an excellent power drill and more than capable of using these tools to compress these springs. So that is what I am going to use. And now once you have the spring compressed, then you are going to use these metal hose clamps. You are going to put them around what you just compressed, and using the ones that I have, take an 8mm socket and your drill, you are going to tighten them down. That will allow you to remove these and get flexibility to hold the spring compressed. And then, with the spring compressed and being held safely by these metal hose clamps, you will be able to take off this top nut and release this assembly. And then you're going to have to use these a couple more times to get this thing small enough to where you can put it back on the new strut. So, I am going to start this process. It's impossible for me to film it because I need all of my hands for this. So once these are compressed, then we will resume. Okay, so here is the strut after doing that. You'll notice that the spring is compressed and is being held on this side by this pipe clamp and on the other side by this other clamp. Now, you don't have to worry if they're even or not. You'll have plenty of more times to fight this thing once you actually take it off the strut. And also, don't worry about damaging this coil spring either. It is really strong. It is not going to deform from this process. And really, you should be more worried about yourself because this is a terrible process and you gotta watch out. Because if you have a torquey drill like mine, everything can kind of flop around if you let it get out of hand. But this is what the strut should look like before you take off this top nut. Now, on the top nut, you will notice there is another hole. This is for a T30 Torx screwdriver. And GM wants to sell you a tool for $100 that's basically like a socket like this, but there's a cutout at the top for you to shove in your T30 Torx. And the idea is you hold it with the Torx and then you undo it with the socket and the whole thing comes out. I am not giving GM 100 of my dollars, especially after they put me through all of this. So there is another way. The whole reason why you want to hold the shaft is because it spins. These threads connect to the same shaft that is right here. So what you want to do to hold it is get a C-clamp like this, and you're going to want to pull the boot down, feed the clamp in between the gaps in the spring, and tighten the boot around the shaft. Now, you don't want to go so tight because we don't want to damage the shaft. And indeed, you're going to have to do this process in reverse to get the coil spring back onto the new strut. All we're trying to do is we're going to use the nice soft rubber of the boot to act like a brake to either stop this shaft from spinning entirely or so it spins slower than our force to take this nut off. So I'm going to go and do that. I'm going to show you what it looks like. And here is what that looks like. Note how the C-clamp, there is no metal on metal. We are using the nice soft rubber of the boot like a brake. So now this shaft won't spin, and now you can come in here with an 18 millimeter socket and take off this nut. Now, I warn you, be careful, and again, make sure you are compressed. This is the point of no return. Once you take this off, this nut off, it is going to be a fight to get this coil spring back on the new strut. So, I'm going to go and do that now, and I will be back when I am done. Okay, and here is the result. Once you get this top nut off, the rest of this kind of pops off ever so slightly, and you are left with this top connector piece. This is the part that connects the top of the strut to the strut tower. This is that cap I was talking to you about earlier with the rubber pad for the top of the spring. This is the washer right here that goes here, and then this sits on top. The bolt goes through it, and then that is what holds the strut together. This is just a spacer washer. This is the boot. It has a metal cap that it connects to, and this is the rubber stopper that is inside of it. Now, the rubber stopper sits on the shaft like this, so it can better engage with the top of the boot cap right here. Now, here is the spring. It is all clamped up. I had to add another clamp over here while I was trying to compress it to get this top nut off. This top nut off comes off easiest when the spring is compressed because the tension is somewhat relieved. If you do not tighten this down enough, this will never come off no matter how much you tighten this clamp around the boot, around the shaft to hold it in place. Also, critically, notice how my shaft is not damaged. The strut, even though it's the old one, it isn't damaged, which is very important because that's how you know that this process works. Again, you do not want this to be tight enough where it's going to deform the metal. The whole point is to use this and the boot together like a brake pad to compress around the shaft so it either doesn't turn or doesn't turn as fast as this nut when you are loosening it. Now, I originally said I was going to use my socket wrench or a breaker bar. Because this was allowing this shaft to turn ever so slightly, I had to get my power drill involved, and that allowed me to turn this much faster than this was spinning, which the net result was it backing off. Now, here is the rest of your challenge, and it is going to be hard. You are going to have to compress this spring enough so it can fit on the new strut. Now, here is the new strut. Here is the spring. Just holding them up next to each other, you will see that there is a huge difference in size. You know, maybe it'll be easier if I lay everything down. You'll notice I'm just going to move these somewhere where I won't lose them. Very important. You don't want to lose any of this shit or you're screwed. Okay. Very important. I'm going to lay the new strut down. We're going to take this other stuff out of the way. And here is the spring. This little narrow bit is the bottom. and the wider bit is the top. You'll notice that the spring is now much longer than the area that it has to take up. It is up to you, using those Mcpherson spring compressors and your metal hose clamps, to compress this thing again and again and again until it does fit. Now, before we start doing that, it is important to prep the strut to receive the spring. All you got to do is flip it up like this, and you're going to start transferring hardware. So on the old strut, we have this guy. This is the rubber seat for the bottom of the spring, and it actually lines up perfectly with this new strut. If you look on the side where the spring channel ends, we have this little notch here, fits into this little tab here. So we just connect them together like this, and now this side is in. Then wrap it inside of the spring channel over, and this little notch right here fits into this hole right here. And now, as you start tightening this spring, you take this end here, the smaller end, it might have a green mark, it might not, and you drop it over the strut. And then you line up this end piece here, very important that it's lined up exactly. You line up this end piece here with the end of the cushion all the way. And then you stand the spring up and you see if the top of the strut is higher than the top of the spring. The spring has to be lower than the top of this. Otherwise, the hardware won't connect. So now it is up to you to tighten it again and again and again until that happens. So you'll know you're there when, I'll just put this down, this is the top cap, and this is the rubber thing for the spring. This notch right here is where the spring ends. That correlates directly to here. So when you put this back on top of the spring like this, if it sits down in here like this and the threads are exposed, you know you're tightened enough. It's okay if it's not down like all the way to where you see the smooth part. That's not really important, because once you put all this back on and you tighten it back up with your drill, that compressive force will get it the rest of the way. But you do want to get it so the spring allows you to effortlessly put this thing back on and see most of the threads. And that is on with, again, do not forget that washer, do not forget that top mount. It is all very important. So now I am going to spend the next, oh God, probably 45 minutes tightening this thing so it'll get there, just using those two things, one on each side, tightening, clamping, moving, and then I'll show you what to do when you are done and you're ready to put this back on. Okay, so I am there, and here is what this looks like. You will see my strut is compressed, and I have used many metal hose clamps to keep it that way. Basically, using these two Mcpherson spring compressors and my handy dandy drill. I put these on, I compress, I add these clamps, I change out my socket to the one for the clamps, I clamp it down, I remove the Mcpherson clamp, I move it to a different part of the spring, and I basically keep going again and again and again and again until the spring is completely recompressed. And now you can see that the top of the strut is higher than the top of the spring. And indeed, when I stand this up and align and reinstall the spring, making careful sure to get the end in here, we are much higher. Now, importantly, see how this is kind of off and it's kind of bent looking? Ignore it. It's totally okay. Once you put all the hardware back on and you start taking these off, the spring will naturally decompress into its original shape, which it is desperately trying to go back to. Now, I know that jump cuts might make this look easy, but rest assured, this is at least a half an hour of tedious, if not back-breaking work to get the spring recompressed. So again, I do not recommend you going this route, but if you have to, this is how you do it. Now, with the spring back in the middle here, and we know that it fits, now we can put all the hardware back on. So let's go and do that. All right, I'm going to try and do this on camera so everyone can see what I'm up to. So first, you take the rubber stopper here, and you put it on with the narrower end facing down, and you just put it on the shaft, but not too low, because you want to save some shaft here for your clamp, because you're going to have to do that boot tightening trick again to get the top nut back on. Next, you're going to take your boot and you are going to slide it over the entire assembly, put the threads through it, and get it all the way down as far as it'll go. As far as it will go, that is very important. All right, next, you want to grab your spring. Remember, the smaller, narrower end here, yours might be marked with a green mark. It might not be, but it is the smaller end. You want to put the spring on. So stand the strut straight up. I'm going to see if I can do this on camera. Hold it with my feet and feed. Turn the light a little more. Hang on. Let's see. All right. Come on. All right. And we're going to put the spring over this whole assembly. Just get it in there. All right. I'm going to have to put the phone down. Hang on. All right. Expect some resistance, but just get it in there and get it lined up perfectly in its little spring channel here, where the end of it is fully engaged with the end of the cushion. Now, coming back to the top, we take our top cap right here, we put it on, then we take our washer. It's a little raised on one end. You put the flat end against the top of this like that, so the flat end is fully engaged with this. Then you get your top piece, slide it on top, then you get your nut and you get it started. Now, I can't do this on camera, but you want to adjust this. So on your top cap, this guy right here, this notch, this here, right here, this lines up with where your spring ends right here. So it's gonna take some fiddling, but do it. I'm gonna need two hands. It's going to fight me, but I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. All right, so this is what it looks like when everything is back together properly. You'll see the larger end, I guess it also has a green mark too, but the larger end is perfectly seated in the cushion part of its top plate. The smaller section is, we should probably rotate that a little more, but that's seated in its part, in the lower part of the strut. We have our top nut on, just hand tighten, and there's plenty of room to go. So now, what you got to do is, when we loosened it, we used this guy, the C-clamp, to hold the boot so we could loosen it. Now it is that, now it is that process in reverse. So get the C-clamp around the boot and around the shaft, and then use your drill or your wrench to get this thing in here. The recommended torque is 44 pound-feet. I mean, really, because this thing has so much tension on it, I just don't think that matters. Good way to do it is to count the threads on your other strut and try and match it as close as possible. So I'm going to go and do that, and then I will show you how we remove and get these off. Do not loosen these until this is tightened to your liking. So, all right, I'll be back when it's done. Okay, so as you can see here, turn it into the light a little more, I have tightened it down sufficiently using my clamp technique. So, and I counted my threads. They match with the other side of the car, and I was able to reach 44 foot-pounds. I may have gone slightly over with my torque wrench, but I was able to do that. So now, this is back together. Just do one last spot check. Make sure that the end is in the end, and it is, and make sure that the top is in the top part of that rubber cushion right there. So now we can, after putting this whole thing back together, decompress the spring and it'll go back to normal on the new strut. Here is how we do that. So you first want to put your socket for the clamps onto your drill or impact wrench, and you want to first loosen the clamps at the bottom and the top. Whatever clamps intersect with where the spring makes contact with the rubber pads. You want to do those first because it is going to be much easier to pull these out. If you decompress the full spring, it's going to be tough to pull these guys out. And that is actually the trick to get them out because they are slippery and they are thin. Even with the spring fully decompressed, these guys, you could just pull them right out, and then the rest of these just pull out, and it's very easy. So I'm going to start with the bottom one. You just put it in there in reverse, and then you just decompress the spring. And you'll see the spring here decompressing back to normal. You just get this out. Once it's free, you put the drill down, and now it's as easy as grabbing it, and it might take a little, but you pull it out. You might have to fight it a little bit, but you pull the thing out. There we go. Done. Check for one on the other side. Nope. All right, the next one that we have to do then is this guy at the top. And then the rest of these come out like a cakewalk. And you see now that the spring has fully decompressed and is sitting perfectly where it's supposed to, which is exactly what we're looking for. So now, I'm going to do this one all the way at the top. Again, the drill is in reverse. It's going to connect it. Come on. And we loosen. And you'll see the spring decompress. Perfect. Now you get the drill out and you put it down. You grab it. And I'm going to put this on the ground so I put some torque behind it. And you yank it out. And it's really a pain in the ass. But you can get it. Just a little wiggle action. And it's out. Oops, I missed that moment. But all right. Probably should have caught that on camera a little better. But I literally just pulled it out. Great. And now we keep going. Don't worry if the spring hangs over a bit. Once it's decompressed, it'll go back to normal. So now, same thing with the rest of them. I'll come back when I'm done. Okay, the clamps are off and we are done. You will see that the spring has returned to its natural shape. Everything is nicely seated. Everything is done. And that is it. You have just reassembled your strut. The top nut is back on and tightened perfectly. And now you are ready to put this thing back on your car. So, just like at the beginning of the video, it's the same process, but in reverse. Just one thing to note before we go through it here. You see on the top of the strut, see if I can get it in the light a little better, we have next to these bolts, we have these two little like nubs sticking out, one here, then the other one's right here. If we look on the car at the strut tower, we see here are the holes for the bolts, here are the holes for the nubs. Make sure that you line them up properly, otherwise you're going to have to pull the strut back out of the car to make sure that they align. Otherwise, the top of the strut won't sit flush with the top of the strut tower, and you will have problems. So, I'm going to get this thing back into the car. When you put it back in, just be careful. I'll bring my light over here. Just be careful that you don't tangle it up in the various hoses for the brakes and the wiring and everything. See how everything here is staying so nice because of our little zip tie chain here. So, all right, I'm gonna get this thing in the car, so I will be right back. Okay, and we are back in the car. So I've avoided all of the areas that might get damaged by reinstalling it. Just make sure you really get the wires out of the way. And we see here that the strut is hanging because I have installed my top nuts. Now, critically important, you only want to start them and get them hand tight. Do not tighten these all the way. You only do that when the suspension is sitting on the ground, when the wheel is back on the ground, and everything is in tension as normal. So the next thing that we're going to do now is we're going to leave this loose and hanging You see though through here I got my nubs lined up, so when I do tighten it, it'll be fine. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to come down here. We're going to fix our lights so we can see what we're doing. We're going to line up the receiver in the wheel assembly. We're going to turn the strut around and we're going to push them together so the holes line up. Then we're going to take our bolts and we're going to run them through, make sure that we put them in the same orientation so the nuts were on this side, and I'm going to repeat that process here. And it takes 2 hands, so I will come back when that is done. Okay, so here we have both of the bolts started and everything is in. So what you're going to want to do now is you're going to want to take your torque wrench, set for 111 foot-pounds, or as close as possible. I like actually going a little over. And you're going to want to torque the nut, and then the other side, because it will spin this time, 22 millimeter wrench. I have my nice ratcheting wrenches. I'm going to put it in here like this. Make sure it's set in the way to reduce the spinning. It's long enough so where it's going to hit the side of the car, so I can just kind of leave it here. Then I'm going to take my torque wrench, plug it in, and then I'm going to... All right, well, I'll have to get that. But then anyway, I'm going to keep going until it clicks at 111 foot-pounds. I'll do that for both of these. Also, it is helpful if you push back on the whole assembly a bit. That is how they come from the factory, and it'll help you keep your camber settings and your alignment settings. Although I do recommend when you're done with this, because this is major suspension work, to go for an alignment after. But just push it back a little as you tighten. It'll help you in the long run. So, all right, I'm going to tighten these 2 bolts, and then I will come back. Okay, so now my bolts are in, and they are properly torqued down. This thing is going nowhere, but we still aren't done, because it is 111 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. Now, what does that mean? It means once you hear the click on your torque wrench, you stop with the torque wrench, and then you have to get the bolt to spin another 90 degrees, which means you get your breaker bar out, and you do it. Now, how do you measure for this? Well, there's 2 ways you can do it. One is you can get a Sharpie, mark like the bottom of the bolt, and get it to 90 degrees over here. Once you get here, then you know that you're there. The other way that you can do it is by using the breaker bar as like an angle finder. So you plug it in, and note how it is sticking out at a 90-degree angle. You turn it until it is now facing completely up, or that's a little... I'll hit the top of the wheel well that way. I'll turn it 90 degrees from here, so basically I'll know I'm there when it's like coming up like that. And then you're there. But if you want to be a little more precise, mark the bolt with a Sharpie, spin it. Once you hit 90, life is good. Do that for both bolts and they are done. So I am going to go do that now and come back. Okay, and we are done. It might not look different, but I promise you these have been turned to 90 degrees. Now with this done, the next thing to put back on is your stabilizer shaft linkage. And you put that in. See if I can change my light a little bit. That goes in right here where you got it from. Now, if you notice though, this is much higher than the hole where it is supposed to go. Well, that is when you get your jack again and you situate it underneath your lower control arm and you jack the suspension back up until you can put this in. So I'm going to try and get this on camera. I'm going to use my jack here to compress the suspension, and I'm going to see if this will fit in here yet. Nope, but we're getting closer. So we're going to keep going up until the hole lines up, and I think we're there. So I'm going to try and put this in now. See, and we're there. Perfect, and it's nice and straight. So now you're going to get the bolt, you're going to put it back in, and then using that hex to socket adapter, you're going to do the exact same process in reverse to tighten it. The torque for this is 44 foot-pounds. So get it there, and then we are done with the stabilizer shaft linkage. So I'm going to go do that, and I will be right back. All right, and that is done and in. It is tightened to 44 foot-pounds, and you'll know you're too tight if the back of this thing, if the assembly doesn't wiggle. It's supposed to wiggle because it's supposed to react to things in the road with your suspension. If it doesn't wiggle, you know that it's too tight. If when you wiggle it, the whole bolt is loose and continues to wiggle, then you know that it isn't tight enough. But this is wiggling with some force, and this is to the proper torque, and it doesn't move when I wiggle it. So that is how we know that everything is back and it is fine and good. So now, next, you're going to put back the brake line bolt that just goes right here, and you put the bolt that you took out right back through it. And this guy is the wire going to your wheel speed sensor. You fish out that clip from your old strut, and you put that right through this hole here. This clicks onto it, and then everything is back together. So I am going to go and do that and come back. Okay, and now everything is done and back in. Let me adjust my light so it's a little clearer. But this is the bolt right here that holds the brake line to the support bracket in the strut. And this is that clip. You just push it right back in. Then you put this little rubber holder for the wire for the wheel speed sensor into it. And then you fold the clip back down, push it inside of itself, and you're done. And now you are basically done with everything except for tightening these 3 bolts at the top of the strut tower. So next, what you're going to want to do is, at this point, you're going to want to lower your jack so the suspension resets back to normal. And then grab your wheel and put your wheel back on. Then lower the car completely off of your jack stand, off of your jack, back onto the ground so it is resting back on the wheel. I'm going to go do that and then come back. One last thing before I lower the car. Just remember to remove that bungee cord or zip tie chain or whatever you did to secure your wheel assembly to your sway bar. It's obviously not needed anymore, and you don't want to leave it on there when you're trying to put everything back together. So just cut it off with a pair of wire ties or undo it or whatever, and then you are good to go. So I'm going to put the car on the ground now, and then we are going to finish. Okay, so now the wheel is back on. The car is on the ground, and if you notice now, these bolts are pushed up because now the strut is firmly seated against the tower. Now is when you tighten these guys down. So their torque setting is 13 foot-pounds. Set that on your torque wrench, tighten them down, and you are done. So I'm going to go do that, and I will be right back. Okay, everything is properly seated and torqued down. Note how the nubs are aligned properly. You got to do that while you put the strut back in, like I discussed. But now everything is done and torqued, and that is it. The last thing to do is get your cover for the top of the strut tower and put it back on. And you are done. Congratulations if you made it through this far and actually did it. It is a pain in the ass. Go and get yourself a beer and enjoy the fact that you have saved yourself literally hundreds of dollars. The other strut on the other side of the car is the exact same way, just on that side. You could watch this video again if you're going to do the strut on the other side. Generally speaking, struts are replaced in pairs. So if you do this side, do the other side. And I have already done that side before I started filming this video. I have been here for hours. So anyway, I hoped you liked this video and found it helpful and informative. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to, and feel free to use the affiliate links I have in my description to find these parts on Amazon. If you do wind up buying these parts to do this, I would appreciate it if you did use my links. That would really take the sting out of doing this whole thing. So thank you very much, and thank you for watching.